The howling wind drowned out Vivian Owen's desperate gasps as she stumbled through knee-deep snow, each labored breath visible in the frigid Wyoming air of 1885. Blood from her split lip had frozen on her chin, and the bruises blooming across her ribs made each step agony as the blizzard's fury intensified around her. She had fled with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket clutched in her trembling hand, the only thing worth taking from the nightmare she once called home. Vivian had been walking for hours since escaping Bitter Creek, her husband Vernon's drunken snores giving her the narrow window she needed to slip away into the night. The storm had begun soon after, as though nature itself conspired against her escape. Now, as darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, desperation clawed at her heart. Her thin coat offered little protection against the merciless cold, and the numbness creeping into her fingers and toes whispered promises of a frozen grave. Through the swirling white, a faint light flickered so distant that Vivian thought her mind might be playing cruel tricks. But as she forced one foot in front of the other, the light grew stronger, resolving into the warm glow of a lantern hung outside a small cabin. With renewed determination, she pushed forward, her frozen legs barely responding to her commands. The cabin door opened before she reached it, spilling golden light across the snow. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, the howling wind carrying away whatever words he called out. Vivian managed 3 more steps before her strength finally gave out. As the snow rose to meet her, strong arms caught her fall. "I've got you, miss," a deep voice assured, cutting through the storm's roar. "Come on now, let's get you inside before you freeze solid." The man lifted her with surprising gentleness, carrying her across the threshold into blessed warmth. Through half-closed eyes, Vivian caught glimpses of a modest but tidy cabin interior, a crackling fire, rough-hewn furniture, and the rich scent of coffee brewing. "Name's Wade Turner," the man said as he carefully set her down in a chair by the fire. "And you look like you've been through hell itself to get here." Wade moved with efficiency, removing her snow-crusted boots and wrapping a thick woolen blanket around her shoulders. In the firelight, Vivian could see him clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. The calluses on his hands spoke of hard work, but his touch remained gentle as he examined the bruise darkening her cheekbone. "Those aren't from the cold," he observed quietly, his jaw tightening. Vivian turned away, shame burning hotter than the fire. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're not." Wade nodded once, asking no further questions as he moved to pour her a cup of coffee. "Drink this," he instructed, pressing the steaming mug into her hands. "Then we'll see about getting you warmed up proper." As feeling painfully returned to her extremities, Vivian took in her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was small but sturdy, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and what appeared to be a single bedroom visible through a partially open door. Rifles hung above the mantel, and various tools of ranch life adorned the walls. "Where am I?" she finally asked, her voice stronger after sips of the hot, bitter coffee. "My homestead," Wade replied, stoking the fire. "About 15 miles northeast of Shoshone, Idaho. Storm caught you bad, I reckon." "Idaho?" Vivian's hand trembled, sloshing coffee over the rim of her mug. "I crossed the state line," Wade's eyebrows raised slightly. "You didn't know where you were heading." "Away," she answered simply. "Just away." Something in her tone must have communicated the depth of her desperation, for Wade asked no more questions. Instead, he busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork, occasionally glancing at her with undisguised concern. "Storm's likely to last through tomorrow," he observed, sliding a plate of food in front of her. "You're welcome to shelter here till it passes." Vivian stared at the steaming plate, suddenly aware of her ravenous hunger. "I don't want to impose no imposition in keeping somebody from freezing to death," Wade interrupted firmly. "Eat now. Rest. We can talk more when you're ready." As she ate, Vivian noticed Wade purposefully giving her space, moving to the far side of the cabin where he began mending a bridle with practiced hands. The simple kindness, food, warmth, and the absence of prying questions brought a lump to her throat. Later, after she'd eaten her fill, Wade showed her to the bedroom. "You take the bed," he said, cutting off her protests before they began. "I'll be fine by the fire." Exhaustion claimed her as soon as her head touched the pillow. The scent of pine and leather surrounding her as she slipped into the first peaceful sleep she'd known in months. Morning arrived with a persistent ache in Vivian's ribs, and the disorienting moment of waking in an unfamiliar place. The events of the previous night flooded back as she slowly sat up, wincing at the protest from her bruised body. Through the small window, she could see the blizzard continued unabated, the world outside nothing but swirling white. The smell of frying bacon drew her from the bedroom. Wade stood at the cast-iron stove, his back to her as he worked the skillet. He'd removed his coat and his suspenders crossed broad shoulders over a faded blue shirt. "Morning," he said without turning. "Figured you could use some breakfast." "How did you know I was awake?" Vivian asked, pulling the borrowed blanket tighter around her shoulders. Wade glanced back with a slight smile. "Floorboards creak by the doorway. Sit yourself down, coffee's hot." As they ate, Wade maintained a respectful silence, though Vivian could feel questions hovering in the air between them. Finally, when the plates were empty, he spoke. "Those bruises need tending," he said matter-of-factly. "Got some witch hazel and clean bandages." Vivian's hand instinctively went to her face. "I'll be fine." "Maybe so, but proper care means faster healing." Wade's tone was gentle but firm. "Your ribs are bothering you too, I can tell by how you're sitting." She hesitated, years of Vernon's control making her instinctively wary of male attention. But there was nothing in Wade's eyes that resembled her husband's predatory stare. "Why help a stranger?" she asked suddenly. Wade considered this as he collected their plates. "My pa always said you measure a man by how he treats those who can offer him nothing in return." He shrugged. "Besides, out here, refusing help is a good way to end up dead." There was simple truth in his words that Vivian couldn't argue with. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Wade retrieved a small wooden box from a shelf and set it on the table between them. "I won't ask questions you're not ready to answer," he said, opening the box to reveal neatly organized medical supplies. "But I reckon you ran from something worse than this storm." Vivian watched his weathered hand sort through the supplies, a lump forming in her throat. "His name is Vernon," she said finally, the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. "My husband. 5 years we've been married. He wasn't always like this." Wade's expression remained neutral as he dampened a cloth with witch hazel. "They rarely start showing their true colors right away," he said quietly, offering her the cloth. As Vivian pressed the cloth to her cheek, the cool relief was immediate. It started small, a harsh word. A grip too tight on my arm. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then came the first slap. He cried after, promised it would never happen again. "But it did," Wade said, his voice matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "It always does," Vivian confirmed, a bitter smile twisting her lips. "Last night was different, worse, I thought." She couldn't finish the sentence. Wade nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. "And now I have nothing," Vivian admitted, the reality of her situation crashing down. "No money, no family to turn to, just the clothes I'm wearing." You have your life, Wade corrected gently, and time to build something new. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls, a harsh reminder of the world beyond this temporary haven. He'll come looking, Vivian said, voicing her deepest fear. Vernon's not a man who lets go of what he considers his. Wade's expression hardened slightly. Let him try, he said simply, closing the medical box with a decisive click. The blizzard raged for 2 more days, keeping them confined to the small cabin. During that time, Vivian learned that Wade had come west after the war, staking a claim on this land 6 years prior. He raised cattle on the surrounding acres, managed with the help of 2 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse about a quarter-mile away. They rode out to check the southern pasture before the storm hit, Wade explained as they sat by the fire on the second evening. Should be hunkered down in the line shack by now. Vivian found herself studying Wade when he wasn't looking the way his hands moved with surprising dexterity despite their size, the quiet confidence in his movements, the lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He was nothing like Vernon, whose handsome face had hidden a cruel spirit. On the morning of the 3rd day, they awoke to silence. The blizzard had finally passed, leaving a transformed world of pristine white outside the windows. The sun reflected blindingly off the snow, and Vivian squinted against the brightness as she joined Wade at the door. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he remarked, pulling on his heavy coat. "Need to check on the stock, make sure everything weathered the storm all right." Vivian nodded, suddenly aware that her time in this sanctuary was coming to an end. "I should be moving on," she said, though the thought filled her with dread. "I've imposed long enough." Wade turned to her, his expression serious. "And where exactly would you go?" The question hung between them, highlighting the reality of her situation. Vivian had no destination, no plan beyond fleeing Vernon. "I thought perhaps boys," she said hesitantly. "It's bigger, easier to disappear." "Might be," Wade agreed, pulling on his gloves. "But traveling alone through this country in winter is asking for trouble." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I could use help around here. Cooking, mending, keeping accounts. My handwriting's terrible." His eyes met hers directly. "Stay through winter at least. By spring, you'll have some money saved, better chance of making your way." The offer stunned Vivian into momentary silence. "You'd employ a woman you don't even know." "I know enough," Wade replied simply. "You're strong enough to flee a bad situation, smart enough to survive a blizzard, and honest enough to admit when you need help." He shrugged. "That tells me more about a person than years of shallow acquaintance." Hope dangerous, fragile hope flickered to life in Vivian's chest. "Your ranch hands might not take kindly to a woman in your home. Pete and Hank are good men," Wade assured her, "and it's my home to decide who stays in it." He hesitated, then added, "I've got a small cabin out back. Previous owner built it for his mother. It needs some work, but it'd give you your own space once we get it fixed up." The thoughtfulness of the offer brought unexpected tears to Vivian's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Wade said, settling his hat on his head. "Just good, honest work, that's all I ask." With that, he stepped out into the brilliant white morning, leaving Vivian to consider a future she hadn't dared imagine hours before. True to Wade's prediction, Pete and Hank returned that afternoon. 2 weather-beaten men who greeted Vivian with respectful nods after Wade explained her presence as the new housekeeper. If they noticed her fading bruises or questioned the arrangement, they kept such thoughts to themselves. "Mrs. Owen will be staying through winter," Wade informed them as they warmed themselves by the fire. "She'll be taking over the cooking and household matters." "Thank the Lord," Pete, the older of the 2, exclaimed with evident relief. "No offense to your cooking, boss, but that stew last month nearly killed us all." Hank, younger and shyer, merely tipped his hat to Vivian. "Madam," he said simply. That evening, after the hands had retired to their bunkhouse, Wade showed Vivian the small cabin he'd mentioned. Though dusty and in need of repair, it had potential: a single room with a small stone fireplace, sturdy walls, and a window that would catch the morning sun. "Like I said, needs work," Wade acknowledged as they surveyed the space by lantern light. "But it'll give you independence." Vivian ran her hand along the rough wooden mantel, imagining the space cleaned and furnished. "It's perfect," she said softly. Over the next 2 weeks, a rhythm developed at the Turner Ranch. Vivian rose early to prepare breakfast for Wade and the hands, then spent her days cleaning the main house, mending clothes, and slowly refurbishing the small cabin. Wade and the men tended the cattle, repaired fences damaged in the storm, and hauled supplies from town when weather permitted. In the evenings, they often sat by the fire, Wade teaching Vivian the ranch's bookkeeping system. Their conversations flowed easily, moving from practical matters to deeper subjects: Wade's experiences during the war, Vivian's childhood in Pennsylvania, books they had read, places they hoped to see. "Never thought I'd end up in Idaho," Vivian admitted one evening as she carefully recorded figures in the ledger. "As a girl, I dreamed of San Francisco." Wade, whittling a piece of pine by the fire, glanced up with interest. "Why San Francisco?" Vivian smiled at the memory. "My father had a book with illustrations: tall ships in the harbor, grand buildings on hills. It seemed magical." Her smile faded. "Vernon laughed when I mentioned it, said a woman had no business with such foolish dreams." "Your husband sounds like a damn fool," Wade observed, his knife pausing in its work. "Begging your pardon for the language." "No need for pardons when speaking truth," Vivian replied, surprised by the strength in her own voice. As January yielded to February, Vivian's small cabin became habitable. Wade and the hands had repaired the roof, sealed drafts, and built simple furniture: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves along one wall. Vivian added touches that made it: home curtains sewn from feed sacks, a braided rug by the fireplace, wildflowers dried and arranged in a clay jar. The night she moved in, Wade presented her with a gift: a sturdy lock for the door, complete with a key on a leather cord. "Your own place," he said, handing her the key. "Safe and private." The simple gesture, acknowledging her need for security and respecting her boundaries, moved Vivian deeply. "Thank you," she said, clutching the key tightly, "for everything." Wade merely nodded, his eyes lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary before he bid her good night. Alone in her new space, Vivian sat on the edge of her bed, the key still warm in her palm. For the first time since fleeing Vernon, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of a future where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder. A future where she might even find happiness again. February brought milder weather, allowing Wade and the hands to ride farther afield, checking on distant parts of the ranch that had been inaccessible during the worst of winter. On these days, Vivian found herself watching the horizon anxiously, until she spotted 3 riders returning, relief flooding through her when she confirmed Wade was among them. The nature of her feelings for him became impossible to ignore the day he rode out alone to help a neighboring ranch with a difficult calving. Hours passed beyond his expected return, and as dusk approached with no sign of him, Vivian's worry transformed into something close to panic. "He knows these lands better than anyone," Pete reassured her as they stood on the porch, scanning the darkening landscape. "Probably just stayed to help with more than one birth." Vivian nodded, trying to appear calm though her heart raced. "Of course, I just thought, with supper ready." Pete's knowing glance told her the excuse fooled no one. "Boss can take care of himself, Mrs. Owen. Been doing it a long time." It was well after midnight when Wade finally returned, exhausted but unharmed. Vivian had stayed awake in the main house, a lamp burning in the window as she mended shirts to occupy her restless hands. "Didn't expect to find anyone still up," Wade said as he entered, stamping snow from his boots. Vivian set aside her mending, trying to mask the intensity of her relief. "I was just finishing some work," she said lightly. "Their stew kept warm in the oven." Wade studied her face, seeming to read the concern she'd been trying to hide. "You were worried," he stated simply. "It was getting late," Vivian acknowledged, unable to meet his eyes. "And the weather's turning." Wade hung his coat and hat, then moved to stand before her. Gently, he lifted her chin with one finger until their eyes met. "I'm touched by your concern, Vivian," he said softly, "and I'm sorry if I caused you distress." Something in his tone, in the way he said her name, made Vivian's breath catch. For a suspended moment, they stood close enough that she could feel the cold still emanating from his clothes, see the fatigue etched in the lines around his eyes. Then the spell broke as Wade stepped back, clearing his throat. "That stew sounds mighty fine right about now," he said, his voice returning to its usual tone. As February gave way to March, the land began to stir from winter's grip. The first brave shoots of green appeared in sheltered spots, and the days grew noticeably longer. With the changing season came increased activity, cattle being moved to fresh pastures, fences needing repair after winter's damage, preparations for spring calving. Vivian found herself busier than ever, yet also more content than she could remember being in years. Her bruises had long since healed, leaving only faint shadows that would soon fade completely. The nightmares that had plagued her first weeks at the ranch grew less frequent, though she still startled at unexpected sounds. One mild afternoon, as Vivian hung laundry on the line strung between her cabin and a nearby pine, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Wade returning early from what was supposed to be a full day's work in the north pasture. "Everything all right?" she called as he dismounted. Wade's expression was unusually serious as he secured his horse. "Got something to discuss with you," he said, approaching the clothesline. "Rode into town yesterday for supplies. Heard some talk that concerned me." Vivian's hands froze on the wet shirt she'd been hanging, ice forming in her stomach. "What kind of talk?" "Man asking questions at the saloon," Wade said, his voice low. "Describing a woman matching your appearance, saying she's his wife who ran off in a state of confusion, offering a reward for information." The shirt slipped from Vivian's suddenly numb fingers, falling into the dirt. Vernon had found her trail. "How?" she whispered, unable to form a complete thought as panic surged. "Idaho's not that big a territory," Wade said grimly. "And a woman traveling alone gets remembered. Reckon he's been working his way through towns, following your trail." Vivian sank onto a nearby stump, legs no longer able to support her. "He'll find me," she said hollowly. "He always said he would if I ever ran." Wade crouched before her, his eyes level with hers. "Listen to me, Vivian. You're not alone anymore. I won't let him hurt you again." "You don't understand," she said, voice breaking. "Vernon's well connected. He has friends in law enforcement. If he claims I'm his property, run away in confusion." "You're not property," Wade interrupted fiercely. "You're a free woman who left an abusive situation. And I aim to make sure you stay free." His conviction steadied her, allowing her to think beyond the initial wave of terror. "What should I do?" Wade considered this carefully. "First, we need to establish that you're here of your own free will, working as my housekeeper. Pete and Hank will back that up. Second, we need to make sure you're never alone until we know Owen's moved on. Vivian nodded, forcing herself to think practically. He might not come this way. Shoshone's small, out of the way. True, Wade acknowledged. But best we prepare nonetheless. He stood, offering her his hand. Come up to the main house. We'll talk it through with the boys. That evening, gathered around the kitchen table, Wade laid out a plan. Vivian would stay in the main house temporarily, her cabin too isolated for safety. Pete and Hank would take turns keeping watch during the night, and no one would ride out alone until the threat passed. What if he comes with the law? Vivian asked, the question that had been gnawing at her. Then we show them your healed bruises and tell the truth, Wade said firmly. Idaho may be rough country, but even here, a man beating his wife isn't looked upon kindly. Pete nodded his agreement. Sheriff Miller's a fair man, won't just take some stranger's word without hearing all sides. As the men discussed further precautions, Vivian felt a complex mixture of emotions: fear of Vernon's potential arrival, guilt for involving these good men in her troubles, and overwhelming gratitude for their unwavering support. Later, as Wade helped her move essential items from her cabin to the spare room in the main house, he paused, seeming to wrestle with a thought. There's another option, he said finally, setting down the box he'd been carrying. One that would make it harder for him to claim any right to you. Vivian looked up questioningly. Marriage, Wade said bluntly, then immediately raised his hands as if to forestall objection. Not a real one, mind you, just on paper. A marriage of convenience that would supersede his claim, legally speaking. Vivian stared at him, momentarily speechless. You would do that, to keep you safe? Yes, Wade answered without hesitation. We'd have it properly annulled once the danger's passed, of course. The offer was so unexpected, so selfless, that Vivian found herself fighting sudden tears. I can't ask that of you. You didn't ask, Wade pointed out gently. I offered. It's a practical solution, nothing more. But as their eyes met across the small room, both knew it wasn't quite so simple. Something had been growing between them these past months, a connection neither had acknowledged openly but both felt nonetheless. I need time to think, Vivian said finally. Wade nodded, respecting her hesitation. Of course, it's just an option to consider. That night, sleep eluded Vivian as she turned Wade's proposal over in her mind. The practical benefits were clear as Wade's wife. Even in name only, she would have legal protection that a mere housekeeper lacked. Vernon would have no claim on her, no right to force her return. Yet the idea of entering another marriage, even one of convenience, filled her with trepidation. Her first experience had left deep scars, not all of them visible. Could she trust again, even someone as demonstrably good as Wade Turner? And beneath these concerns lay another truth she was reluctant to examine too closely. Her feelings for Wade had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. The thought of a marriage in name only, of maintaining a pretense of spousal relationship while denying the genuine connection between them, seemed a special kind of torture. Morning found her bleary-eyed but resolved. After breakfast, when Pete and Hank had ridden out to check the herd, Vivian approached Wade as he cleaned his rifle at the kitchen table. I've been thinking about your proposal, she began, her hands clasped tightly before her. Wade set aside the cleaning rod, giving her his full attention. And if we do this, Vivian said carefully, I need to be clear about something. I left one marriage where I had no voice, no choice. I won't enter another under false pretenses. Wade's brow furrowed. I'm not sure I follow. Vivian took a deep breath, gathering her courage. If we marry, even for convenience, I need to know we're being honest with each other. About why you're really offering and why I'm considering accepting. Understanding dawned in Wade's eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like hope. He stood slowly, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "Vivian," he said softly, "I offered because I want you safe. That's the honest truth." He paused, then continued with careful words. "But if you're asking whether there are other feelings involved, yes, there are." The simple admission sent Vivian's heart racing. "I've been afraid to acknowledge it," she confessed. "After Vernon, I swore I'd never trust a man again, but you're nothing like him. You've shown me kindness without expectation, respect without demand." Wade reached out, hesitantly taking her hands in his. "I care for you, Vivian, more than I intended to, more than might be wise given your situation, but I won't press for anything you're not ready to give." Vivian looked down at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller but equally marked by labor. Hands that had both known hardship, yet still retained the capacity for gentleness. "If we marry," she said, meeting his gaze, "I don't want it to be just on paper. Not eventually, at least. I want it to be real when I'm ready." The smile that spread across Wade's face transformed his features, erasing years of solitude in an instant. "I'd like that," he said simply. "Very much." 2 days later, they rode into Shoshone with Pete as witness and protection. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road: a general store, saloon, small church, and scattering of houses clustered around the stagecoach stop. The circuit preacher happened to be in town, a stroke of timing that Wade declared providential. The ceremony itself was brief and unadorned: no special clothes, no guests beyond Pete, no celebration beyond a shared meal at the town's only restaurant afterward. Yet as Vivian repeated the familiar vows, this time with a voice steady and a heart willing, she felt the weight of Vernon's shadow lifting. The gold band Wade placed on her finger was simple and unadorned, purchased that morning from the general store, yet it represented something profound: not possession, but partnership. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, though Wade insisted on maintaining separate sleeping arrangements. "Nothing changes until you're ready," he assured her that night as they stood awkwardly in the hallway between their rooms. "This is still about keeping you safe, first and foremost." Vivian reached up impulsively, pressing a kiss to his weathered cheek. "Thank you," she whispered before retreating to her room, leaving Wade standing in the hallway with a stunned expression that slowly melted into a smile. The next week passed in a curious mixture of normalcy and heightened vigilance. Vivian continued her household duties, while Wade and the hands maintained constant awareness of approaching riders. Each day without Vernon's appearance allowed them to breathe a little easier, though none dropped their guard entirely. Then, 10 days after their wedding, the confrontation they had been dreading finally arrived. Vivian was alone in the house, kneading bread dough while watching through the window as Wade and Hank repaired a corral fence within shouting distance. The sound of approaching horses drew her attention, and her hands froze in the dough as she saw 3 riders cresting the hill. Even at a distance, she recognized the center figure. Immediately Vernon Owen sat his horse with the same arrogant posture she remembered, his tailored coat and bowler hat incongruous against the rugged landscape. 2 men flanked him, one wearing what appeared to be a deputy's badge. Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs as she quickly wiped her hands and stepped onto the porch, deliberately positioning herself where Wade could see her. The movement caught his attention immediately, and she pointed toward the approaching riders. Wade nodded once, setting down his tools and signaling to Hank before walking calmly toward the house. By the time Vernon and his companions reined in before the porch, Wade stood beside Vivian, his stance relaxed but his eyes watchful. "Vivian," Vernon called, his familiar voice sending ice through her veins despite the pleasant tone. Thank God I've found you. You had me worried sick, darling. Wade's hand found the small of Vivian's back, a silent reminder of his presence. Drawing strength from the contact, she lifted her chin. Hello, Vernon. Vernon's gaze flicked to Wade, then back to Vivian, his false smile never wavering. I've come to take you home, my dear. The doctor says your nervous condition should improve with proper care. The man with the badge cleared his throat. Madam, I'm Deputy Marshal Collins. Your husband has papers here stating you left home during an episode of nervous hysteria. I'm authorized to assist in returning you to his care. Wade stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying authority. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Marshal. This lady isn't Mrs. Owen anymore. She's Mrs. Turner, my wife. Vernon's expression darkened momentarily before he recovered his composure. Nonsense. She's confused, as the doctor certified. Whatever this arrangement is, it holds no legal standing. Our marriage certificate says differently, Wade replied evenly. Signed by Reverend Johnson and properly filed with the county clerk 10 days ago. The deputy frowned, clearly not expecting this complication. That's irregular. Mrs. Owen or Mrs. Turner, perhaps you could explain. All three men turned to Vivian, whose heart pounded so loudly she was certain they must hear it. This was the moment she had feared and prepared for confronting Vernon with others present to witness. I left Vernon of my own free will, she said clearly, her voice stronger than she expected. I left because of this. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing the faded but still visible fingerprint bruises on her arm. And this. She touched her cheekbone, where the last shadow of a bruise remained, and dozens of other marks over 5 years of marriage. Vernon's face contorted with fury, the genial mask slipping entirely. You lying whore, he snarled, starting forward before the deputy's restraining hand on his arm stopped him. Easy now, the lawman cautioned, his expression hardening as he observed Vernon's reaction. She is my wife, Vernon insisted, regaining some control. Whatever false marriage she's entered doesn't change that fact. Not according to Idaho Territory law, Wade countered. Abandonment and cruelty are grounds for divorce here. Vivian established residence, then married again legally. The first marriage is effectively dissolved. The deputy looked uncomfortable, caught between conflicting claims. I'd need to consult with the judge on this matter. Do so, Wade agreed readily. In the meantime, Mr. Owen is trespassing on private property. I'll have to ask him to leave. Vernon's cold eyes fixed on Vivian. This isn't over, he promised quietly. You belong to me. Always have, always will. Something in Vivian snapped at those familiar words, the same threat he'd used to control her for years. I belong to no one but myself, Vernon, she declared, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I choose to share my life with Wade because he treats me as an equal, not a possession. He's twice the man you could ever hope to be. Vernon's hand moved toward his coat, and for one terrifying moment, Vivian thought he might draw a weapon. Instead, he pointed a trembling finger at her. You'll regret this humiliation, he hissed. That's enough, the deputy said firmly, clearly reassessing the situation as he observed Vernon's behavior. Mr. Owen, we'll ride back to town and sort this out legally. I won't be party to forcing a woman to return to a situation that appears problematic. The third man, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Vernon, let's go. This approach isn't working. For a tense moment, Vivian feared Vernon might refuse to leave. Then, with a final venomous glare, he wheeled his horse around. This isn't finished, he called over his shoulder as the three men rode away. Only when they disappeared over the hill did Vivian's composure finally crack. Her legs gave way, and she would have collapsed had Wade not caught her, guiding her gently to sit on the porch steps. "You did wonderfully," he murmured, crouching beside her. "Brave as any person I've ever known." Vivian drew a shaky breath. "He'll be back. Vernon doesn't give up what he considers his." "Let him come," Wade said, a steel edge to his voice. "Next time we'll have the sheriff here too. And every neighbor within riding distance if need be." That night, after a subdued dinner where they discussed practical measures to ensure Vivian's continued safety, she found herself reluctant to retire to her separate room. The confrontation with Vernon had shaken her deeply, but had also crystallized something important: the stark contrast between the man she had fled and the man she had chosen. "Wade," she said softly as he banked the fire for the night, "would you mind? That is, I don't want to be alone tonight." Wade straightened, studying her face carefully. "Are you sure? After today showed me exactly what I left behind and what I've found instead," Vivian interrupted gently. "I'm not suggesting. I'm not ready for everything a marriage entails, but I'd like to fall asleep feeling safe. With you beside me." The tenderness that filled Wade's expression made her heart swell. "I'd be honored," he said simply. That night, lying beside Wade in the darkness, his solid presence a comfort rather than a threat, Vivian felt the first real peace she'd known in years. His breathing eventually deepened into sleep, but he maintained a respectful distance, true to his word that nothing would happen until she was ready. In that moment, watching the moonlight trace the profile of this good, patient man, Vivian realized she was falling in love, not the desperate, clinging attachment she'd felt for Vernon in their early days, but something steadier, stronger, built on mutual respect and genuine kindness. Vernon made one more attempt to reclaim her 3 days later, arriving drunk at the ranch with 3 rough-looking men. This time, Sheriff Miller accompanied them back to town, Vernon in handcuffs after he'd drawn a pistol during the confrontation. "He'll face charges for that," the sheriff assured them before leaving. "Should buy you some peace for a while, and Mrs. Turner," he tipped his hat respectfully to Vivian. "Based on what I've seen today, I'll be recommending to the judge that your current marriage be recognized as fully legal and binding." After the sheriff departed, Wade found Vivian in the garden, staring at the horizon where dust still marked Vernon's forced departure. "You think it's really over?" she asked without turning. Wade stepped beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "No man can predict the future with certainty," he said honestly. "But drawing a weapon on a sheriff is serious business. Vernon will face jail time, which gives us opportunity to strengthen our position here." Vivian nodded, appreciating his refusal to offer false assurances. "I've lived in fear of him for so long," she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how to live without looking over my shoulder." "Then we'll relearn together," Wade said simply. Day by day, the weeks that followed saw gradual changes at the Turner Ranch. Vernon was sentenced to 6 months in the territorial prison for assault and threatening an officer, granting Vivian a respite from immediate fear. Spring advanced rapidly, bringing new life to the land calves in the pastures, wildflowers dotting the hillsides, garden crops sprouting in neat rows. As the land renewed itself, Vivian found herself healing in tandem. The nightmares grew less frequent, her startled reactions to sudden movements diminished, and she began to plan for a future beyond mere survival. She and Wade still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, though they now shared his room, a pallet on the floor his concession to propriety, until she felt ready for more. One warm evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Vivian made a decision she'd been contemplating for weeks. "Wade," she said, breaking their comfortable silence, "do you remember what I said when we agreed to marry? That I wanted it to be real eventually, Wade turned to her, his expression cautious but hopeful. I remember. Vivian reached for his hand, entwining their fingers deliberately. I think I'm ready for eventually to begin. Wade's breath caught audibly. Vivian, are you certain? There's no rush. I've never been more certain of anything, she assured him, meeting his gaze steadily. You've shown me what love should be: patient, kind, respectful. I want to be your wife in truth, not just in name. The joy that transformed Wade's face was answer enough, but his words confirmed it. Nothing would make me happier, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been falling in love with you since that first night, when you had every reason to distrust men, yet still found the courage to accept help. That night, their marriage was truly consummated not in haste or fear, but with gentle tenderness that brought tears to Vivian's eyes. Wade's reverent touch erased the memory of Vernon's brutality, replacing old wounds with new understanding of physical love, as it was meant to be an expression of genuine care rather than dominance. Afterward, lying in the circle of Wade's arms, Vivian marveled at the journey that had brought her here from a desperate flight through a blizzard to this moment of profound contentment. What are you thinking? Wade murmured against her hair. That sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, she answered truthfully. I thought I was running away that night. I didn't realize I was running toward something better. Summer brought prosperity to the Turner Ranch. The cattle thrived, crops grew abundantly, and word arrived that Vernon Owen had been transferred to a prison in Montana Territory after attempting to escape, adding years to his sentence. With this news, the last shadow over their happiness lifted, allowing Vivian and Wade to focus fully on building their future together. In August, Vivian confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting their first child, due in early spring. Wade's reaction to the news was everything she could have hoped for: equal parts joy, wonder, and protective concern. A baby, he repeated, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. Our baby. Are you happy? Vivian asked, though his radiant expression had already answered the question. Beyond words, Wade assured her, gathering her close. I never thought I'd have a family of my own. After the war, I figured I'd live out my days alone with the cattle for company. He shook his head in wonder. Now I have a wife I adore and a child on the way. I'm the most fortunate man in Idaho Territory. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in russet and gold, they prepared for the coming winter and the spring arrival that would follow. Wade added a nursery to their cabin, working evenings by lamplight to craft a cradle from pine harvested on their land. Vivian sewed tiny garments from soft flannel, each stitch an act of love for the child growing beneath her heart. One crisp October evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Wade cleared his throat with uncharacteristic nervousness. I've been thinking, he began, setting aside the harness he'd been mending, about names for the baby. Vivian looked up from her sewing with interest. Do you have ideas? Wade nodded, his expression serious. If it's a boy, I'd like to name him William, after my father. He was a good man who taught me the values I try to live by. William Turner, Vivian repeated, testing the sound. It's a strong name, I like it. And if it's a girl, Wade continued, I thought maybe Elizabeth, after your mother. He'd learned during their evening talks how close Vivian had been to her mother, who had passed away years before her marriage to Vernon. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the suggestion. Elizabeth Turner, she said softly. It's perfect. Wade moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I want you to know something, Vivian. This child, boy or girl, will grow up knowing only love and respect. I swear it. Vivian touched his cheek gently. I know, she said simply. That's who you are. Winter returned to Idaho, but this time Vivian faced it without fear. The ranch was well provisioned, the house warm and secure, and her place within it unquestioned. As Christmas approached, her pregnancy became visible, her dresses requiring adjustment to accommodate her changing figure. Wade's pride in her condition was evident in the way his hand often found the small of her back, in his insistence that she rest when tired, in the tender way he spoke to the child through her growing belly each night before sleep. On Christmas Eve, as a gentle snow fell outside, they exchanged simple gifts by the light of the fire, a new hunting knife for Wade, hand-carved hairpins for Vivian. But the true gift, they both acknowledged, was the life they had built together against all odds. "I never thought I could be this happy," Vivian confessed as they watched the snow through the window, Wade's arms encircling her from behind, his hands resting protectively over their growing child. "Nor I," Wade admitted. "When I found you in that blizzard, half frozen and hurt, all I wanted was to help you survive. I never imagined you'd end up saving me too." Vivian turned in his arms, surprised. "How did I save you?" Wade's smile was gentle as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "From loneliness. From a life half lived. You brought purpose and meaning back to this ranch, back to me." As the new year dawned, bringing 1886 to the Idaho Territory, Vivian's pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the harsh winter. Wade insisted on hiring a local woman to help with household duties, refusing to let Vivian overexert herself as her time grew nearer. February arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow, reminiscent of the blizzard that had brought Vivian to the ranch a year earlier. As she stood at the window one evening, watching fat flakes drift down in the lamplight, she felt the baby shift strongly within her. "Someone's restless tonight," Wade observed, coming to stand beside her. Vivian agreed, placing his hand where the movement was strongest. "I think he or she is eager to meet us." "Just a few more weeks," Wade said, his voice filled with anticipation and a touch of anxiety that Vivian found endearing. For all his capability with ranch matters, the prospect of fatherhood clearly awed him. Those few more weeks proved optimistic. The very next night, Vivian woke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking, followed shortly by the first contractions. "Wade," she whispered, touching his shoulder. "It's time." What followed was a night of labor that tested Vivian's strength and Wade's composure. The midwife, Mrs. Holbrook, was fetched from her homestead 3 miles away, arriving bundled against the cold with her bag of supplies and calm, experienced demeanor. "First babies often take their time," she reassured Wade when he expressed concern about the labor's duration. "Your wife is strong and the baby's positioned well. Just keep her comfortable and let nature take its course." Dawn was breaking when Vivian finally felt the overwhelming urge to push. Wade supported her through each contraction, his steady presence giving her strength when her own began to flag. "You're doing wonderfully," he encouraged, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "Almost there, my brave wife." With a final, tremendous effort, their daughter entered the world small but perfect, her lusty cry filling the room as Mrs. Holbrook efficiently cleared her airways and placed her on Vivian's chest. "A beautiful girl," the midwife announced, smiling at the new parent's awestruck expressions. "Elizabeth," Wade whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he touched his daughter's tiny hand. "Elizabeth Turner." Vivian gazed down at their child, the miracle born of love rather than obligation, and felt her heart expand with overwhelming tenderness. "Hello, Elizabeth," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." Wade leaned down to kiss Vivian's forehead, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he said simply, those 2 words encompassing gratitude not just for their daughter, but for everything Vivian had brought into his life. As spring returned to the land, little Elizabeth flourished under her parents' devoted care. She had Wade's thoughtful blue eyes and Vivian's determined chin, a combination that suggested she would be a force to reckon with as she grew. One mild May evening, as Vivian nursed Elizabeth in the rocking chair Wade had crafted as a birth gift, he approached with an envelope in hand. "This came with the mail today," he said, his expression difficult to read. "It's from the territorial prison." Vivian's arms tightened instinctively around Elizabeth. "Vernon," Wade nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed facing her. "Would you like me to read it?" After a moment's hesitation, Vivian nodded. "We should know what it says." Wade broke the seal and unfolded the official-looking document, scanning it quickly before looking up with evident relief. "It's notification that Vernon died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia, apparently." The news hit Vivian with unexpected complexity, not grief, certainly, but a strange mixture of relief, closure, and faint pity for the man who had never known true love despite his obsession with possession. "Are you all right?" Wade asked gently, watching her face. Vivian considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said finally. "I wouldn't wish death on anyone, but knowing he can never threaten us again." She looked down at their daughter, peaceful at her breast. "I feel like we can truly move forward now." Wade reached out to stroke Elizabeth's downy head. "We've been moving forward since the day you arrived," he reminded her. "This just removes the last shadow from our path." That summer, as Elizabeth grew from newborn to infant, Vivian and Wade expanded their vision for the ranch. With Vernon's threat permanently removed, they felt free to put down deeper roots, making plans for improvements that would benefit future generations. "I'm thinking we should build a proper house next year," Wade suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, Elizabeth sleeping in a basket nearby. "Nothing grand, mind you, but something with room for more children if we're blessed that way." Vivian smiled at the casual mention of their expanding family. "I'd like that," she agreed, "and perhaps a small schoolroom. I was thinking I might teach our children and any others from neighboring ranches." Wade looked at her with evident pleasure. "You'd make a fine teacher. I've seen how you are with Elizabeth, explaining things she's far too young to understand yet." "She understands more than you might think," Vivian defended with a laugh. "She's very advanced for 4 months." "Of course she is," Wade agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "Takes after her mother that way." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the western sky, Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that desperate flight through a blizzard to this peaceful evening, the path had not been easy or straight, but it had led to something precious beyond measure: a true home, a loving marriage, a family begun in joy rather than obligation. Wade seemed to follow her thoughts, reaching over to take her hand. "What are you thinking about so seriously, Mrs. Turner?" Vivian squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for this man who had offered shelter and found himself offering his heart as well. "I was thinking that sometimes the worst storms lead us exactly where we need to be." Wade lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm with the same reverence he'd shown since the beginning. "In that case," he said softly, "I find myself grateful for blizzards." As darkness settled over the Idaho landscape and stars appeared one by one above, Vivian Turner held her husband's hand and watched over their sleeping daughter, secure in the knowledge that the future stretching before them, while certain to hold challenges of its own, would be faced together, with the strength that comes from love freely given and genuinely returned. 5 years later, on a bright autumn day in 1891, Vivian stood on the porch of the new house Wade had built for their growing family. "Elizabeth, now a spirited 5-year-old with her father's thoughtful nature and her mother's determination, helped 3-year-old William collect colorful leaves in the yard, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. Inside, infant James slept peacefully in his cradle, the newest addition to the Turner family having arrived just 2 months prior. The ranch had prospered under Wade and Vivian's joint management, expanding to include more land, a small orchard, and a reputation throughout the territory for quality stock and fair dealings. Wade rode into view, returning from town with the mail and supplies. Elizabeth spotted him first, dropping her leaves to run toward him with arms outstretched. "Papa, Papa!" Watching him dismount to sweep their daughter into a hug, Vivian felt the same surge of love that had grown steadily stronger through the years of their marriage. Wade caught her eye over Elizabeth's head, his smile conveying everything words couldn't express: gratitude for the family they'd created, pride in what they'd built together, and the enduring love that had begun in the most unlikely circumstances. As he approached the porch with Elizabeth on his shoulders and William trailing behind, Vivian thought of the frightened, bruised woman who had stumbled through a blizzard all those years ago, desperate for escape. That woman could never have imagined the happiness that awaited her, or the strength she would find within herself to build a new life. "Welcome home," she called to her husband and children, the words an echo of what Wade had once said to her, when home was still a foreign concept after years of Vernon's tyranny. Wade set Elizabeth down and climbed the steps to pull Vivian into a gentle embrace. "The best words in the English language," he murmured against her hair, "and the truest when you're the one saying them." Together, with their children gathering around, they entered the house that love had built, not just the physical structure, but the family within it, founded on respect, strengthened through adversity, and destined to thrive for generations to come in the wild, beautiful land they now called home.